Welcome to the Golf Fitness Bomb Squad. I'm your host, Chris Finn, and today I wanted to talk about something that came up at our continuing education here at P1st Golf regularly, at least monthly. We our strength coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, our physios, physical therapists. We're always presenting to each other, looking at different topics, researching different things, and our director of our junior programs, Owen, he's crazy smart when it comes to strength training. And he was talking about just different types of training. He was doing an educational for the physical therapists, so that when they get people who are ready to transition to more, performance-based stuff, that they would, obviously be educated what to do. And he was talking about different types of training, contrast training, French contrast, and lots of different types. And I think and just talking about different principles of strength training, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I thought was applicable for the average golfer listening is progressive overload, and what that is, and how that can be helpful for you when used with reps in reserve. And so when you're doing programs at home, I think these are two really, really valuable concepts to understand, to help you kind of subjectively, objectively measure your training and your progress, and if what you're doing is working or not. So unfortunately, I think what happens to a lot of people is, with home gyms, and particularly working at home, you may be using bands. You're not necessarily using weights in terms of, so you have like, hey, that's 20 pounds, and this is 25 pounds, this is 30 pounds. And maybe for those of this is probably, for a lot of you who are not necessarily on a program that's guided by a coach, but you're kind of guiding it yourself. Or for those of you who are on a program with a coach, like we have, a lot of clients obviously that work with our coaches all over the world. And like for them, if you're one of those people, like this is going to help you intra workout, in that workout, how to kind of understand yourself. Like, hey, am I getting better? Right. I think that's a question. Then, am I progressing? And I feel like sometimes, when we test people, every couple of weeks on mobility, and it's like, hey, objectively, hey, that moves better. Like, that's great. Strength wise, sometimes can be a little more challenging, in terms of, hey, am I actually getting better? Each week after week, month after month. And so I think this is where progressive overload and also reps in reserve are two skill sets that you can develop and use, and philosophies or kind of understandings that you can have. So what progressive overloading is basically, let's say today on day one, I can do a goblet squat. So I'm squatting, holding a weight up and down. Let's say I can do it with 10 pounds and I can do 10 of them, right? And then the next day next week, I can do 15 pounds. And then the next day I stay at 15, but I can do 12 repetitions, right? So I'm progressively doing more and more and more. The nuance is you need kind of a reps in reserve number in order to understand if it's truly progressive overload. What that means, what reps in reserve is basically, let's say you do those 10 squats, you try to do one more and your legs give out. You just physically cannot do one, right? That means you had 0 reps in reserve. Okay. If you do them and you literally only have one left, you just barely stand up, and you feel like if you do another one, you're going to collapse, right? That would mean you had 1 rep in reserve. So the reason I call this a need for a skill acquisition is you have to learn what reps in reserve, like what it feels like. I think a lot of people, when they're starting out with training programs, I see this all the time with golfers. We'll watch, we'll ask, that we're trying to kind of gauge their perception of what they have left in the tank. And they'll do a set, like a warm-up set, or they'll be like, I'll say, hey, how many more could you have done? And they'll be like, I could have done 2. And the weight was moving so fast, you're like, it's very clear as an outsider that they could have done like probably 10 more, right? But they just are so they're not familiar with the feeling of that fatigue. Excuse me. So that's where reps in reserve comes into play. Because if we go back to this first example for progressive overload, if you do 10 reps, 10 squats with holding a 10-pound weight, and then the next day you do, a week in a week, you do 15 pounds for 10 reps. Well, if you had 20 reps left on the first time when you did the 10 pounds, like there's no way to really quantify, hey, was that actually a progressive improvement in the load? Like obviously I went up to 15 pounds, but do I still have 20 reps left? Like, it's just, you need to be able to quantify it. I think that's where understanding how to use reps in reserve becomes very, very valuable. And there's ways to learn how to use reps in reserve and train. Honestly, just it's practice. it takes a while to acquire that skill. And that's, we try to work we use reps in reserve with a lot of our people that we work with. And it takes time. And if you're a newbie to training, I think err on the side of, I probably have more in the tank than I think. And that's where you can kind of test yourself. I wouldn't test yourself with a barbell on your back or like a heavy barbell bench press or something like that without anyone there to help you or knowing how to bail. But kind of testing yourself a little bit and say, hey, well, what does it feel like to actually go to failure? Because most people, particularly golfers, have never actually gone to muscular failure, right? It sucks when you get there. Like it's hard, and you're like, oh, that's what that is, right? It's like the first time. I'll use another analogy, like, I don't know, you're at your job, and the first time as a new grad you get out there and you're at your job, and like the first time you actually have to grind and like work really really hard, and you're exhausted, and you're like, oh, that's what hard work is. I didn't know that until now. That's kind of like what it's like the first time you go to failure, where your just muscles just like give out, right? And so progressive load, I think, is a super valuable tool and like a strategy to use to for somebody to say, hey, look, I'm getting better. I did, if we go back to that same example, I did 10 squats with 10 pounds, and I literally like collapsed at the end of that 10th rep. And then the next week you go and you do 10 pounds, 10 reps, and you're like, man, I feel like I could do one more. Like that's good. That means you're getting better. That means you're getting stronger, right? And so I think that's a very simple way to kind of track your progress along the way. And if you're continually seeing progressive overload and you're continually progressing, you don't need to vary the program a whole heck of a lot. Like, and I think unfortunately there is an element in fitness and in golf fitness, and we see it with our clients, where there's like an entertainment level that's desired by them. Or like, hey, I'm bored of this, let's change. And if you're truly sticking like true performance, you're like, but dude, you're continually getting stronger. Let's just keep doing more of the same thing. It's working. Let's just do more of it. As opposed to, if this is working, but I'm bored, so I'm going to switch and go do something else, right? And you see this all the time in business. People are like, hey, it's working, I'm bored, I need something new, right? It's shiny object syndrome, or the woman in the red dress. A lot of people analogies will use. The same thing happens in fitness and workout programs. You're like, hey, this is working, I'm picking up speed, I feel like I'm doing the same things over and over and over again. Well, yeah, duh, because it's working. But there's like this entertainment or this human desire to be like, hey, I want something new, I want to try something new. And that's hard. And I think that's where the truly the greats out there, you hear about routines and doing the same thing for years and years and years and years. The greats are great because they repeat what works over and over and over again, and ignore the desire for something different, right? They say, hey, this is working, I'm just going to do more of it. And I think there's a great lesson to be learned, from the greats and the people at the top of the game, in that. So, yeah, we'll definitely put notes, on, kind of more resources and that sort of thing, if you're a nerd and you want to read more about this sort of training stuff. But I wanted to bring it to light because I do think reps in reserve is a very, very valuable tool for people to use. It actually, they've done research, and it actually will correlate if you get good at it. Like having 2 reps in reserve versus 5 reps in reserve, you can actually correlate that to percent maxes. So it's a nice way for people who maybe don't want to do a lot of math. Just be like, hey, today you're going to do squats, make sure you got 3 left in the tank on every set. Or you're doing, whatever exercise, deadlifting or single leg RDLs or whatever it may be. And it's kind of a fun way for people to feel like they have a little bit of autonomy and like, okay, yeah. And if you're mentally engaged, trying to figure out like, all right, yep, I got about 3 left. Okay, good. But obviously it's a skill. You have to learn how to do it. You got to figure that out. And at the end of the day, if you can get good with it, progressive overload is a way to measure your progress. Is what I am doing working? If I continually get a little bit better, well, then it is working, and therefore you should do more of that until it stops working, at which point then switch. But until then, I think the biggest thing that we need to hear as golfers in the gym is, if you're doing the right stuff, just do more of it. You don't need new, you need more. And doesn't necessarily mean like more volume. It just means just keep doing it for a really, really long time, right? But figure out what you need specifically, assess, don't guess, right? Figure out which strategies of addressing those areas that you need addressed works for you, and then just do it repeatedly for a really, really, really long time, right? 3 rules to live by for longevity in the game of golf. So, hopefully you found that helpful. Hopefully diffused a couple maybe false beliefs out there around like needing to change programs all the time, create muscle confusion. Like for most of you listening, that's not me included. It's really not that necessary. We're not training that high enough level of a volume for it to really matter. We can still get ridiculous improvements and consistent improvements by doing some relatively simple stuff intelligently. So thanks again, as always, for hanging out with me, and we'll look forward to catching you on the next episode.